The scorching Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked pavement of downtown Houston, turning the concrete jungle into a furnace that seemed determined to drain every ounce of moisture from the air. Sarah Mitchell sat beneath the narrow shadow cast by a bus shelter, her swollen belly making it difficult to find a comfortable position. 8 months pregnant and living on the streets had taught her many things, but comfort was a luxury she'd long ago learned to live without. Her thin cotton dress, faded from too many hand washes in public restroom sinks, clung to her skin in the oppressive humidity that characterized Houston's late summer afternoons. Sarah's day had started like every other for the past 4 months. She'd woken up at dawn in the abandoned warehouse on the east side where she'd been sleeping, careful to leave before the security patrols made their rounds at 6:30. Her meager possessions, everything she owned in this world, fit into a single worn backpack that had seen better days. Inside were 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a small bottle of prenatal vitamins she'd received from a free clinic, and a photograph, its edges soft and curled from constant handling. The photograph showed her younger self, smiling brightly in a college graduation gown, arms wrapped around her mother. That was before everything fell apart, before the accusations at work, before her mother's sudden death, before she found herself alone and expecting a child with nowhere to turn. The previous night had brought heavy rain, one of those sudden Texas storms that appeared out of nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. Sarah had huddled under an overpass, protecting her belly from the cold droplets, watching as the city's homeless population scattered like shadows seeking shelter. Some she recognized from her months on the streets, weathered faces that had become familiar in this strange new world she inhabited. There was old Tom, the veteran who talked to himself about Vietnam, and Maria, the young woman who'd aged a decade in the 2 years she'd been homeless. They nodded at each other in silent acknowledgement, a community bound by circumstance rather than choice. Now, as the afternoon sun climbed higher, Sarah prepared for her daily routine. She pulled out her water bottles from the backpack, 12 plastic bottles she'd filled at a public fountain that morning. Selling water to drivers stuck in Houston's notorious traffic had become her primary source of income, bringing in anywhere from $15 to $30 on a good day. It wasn't much, but it kept her fed and allowed her to save a little each week in an envelope she kept hidden in her shoe. She'd managed to save $217 so far, money she hoped would be enough for a cheap motel room when the baby came. The traffic light at the intersection turned red, and Sarah stood up slowly, her hand instinctively moving to support her lower back. Walking between the stopped cars, she offered her water bottles with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Most drivers looked straight ahead, pretending not to see her. Some locked their doors. A few reached for their phones, perhaps to call the police about the homeless woman harassing motorists. Sarah had learned not to take it personally. Desperation had a way of making people invisible. A middle-aged woman in a silver Mercedes lowered her window. "How much?" she asked, her voice neither kind nor unkind, simply transactional. $2, ma'am, Sarah replied, her voice hoarse from the dry air. The woman handed her $3 and took the bottle without waiting for change. Small mercies, Sarah thought, pocketing the bills as the light turned green and the Mercedes pulled away, disappearing into the river of vehicles that never seemed to stop flowing through Houston's arteries. By 2 in the afternoon, Sarah had sold 7 bottles and earned $19. Her feet ached, her back throbbed, and the baby was kicking more than usual, perhaps protesting the heat and constant movement. She decided to take a break and walked the 6 blocks to Memorial Park, a sprawling green space that offered shade and a brief respite from the concrete and exhaust fumes. The park was busy that Sunday afternoon. Families spread blankets on the grass for picnics. Joggers pounded the trails despite the heat. Children's laughter echoed from the playground. Sarah found her usual spot beneath a massive oak tree, its branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dancing patterns on the ground. She sat down carefully, leaning against the rough bark, and pulled out a granola bar she'd bought from a convenience store. The baby kicked again and she placed her hand on her belly, feeling the small movements beneath her skin. "Just a little while longer, sweet pea," she whispered. "I promise I'll find us somewhere safe before you arrive." "I promise you won't grow up like this." It was a promise she made every day, though she had no idea how she would keep it. The shelters were always full, and the waiting list for transitional housing stretched months into the future. She'd applied for assistance, but the bureaucracy moved slowly, and her situation seemed to slip through the cracks of every system designed to help people like her. Sarah closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of rest. The sounds of the park washed over her, creating a peaceful soundtrack that was almost enough to make her forget her circumstances. Almost. The screaming shattered that brief moment of peace. Sarah's eyes flew open. The high-pitched shriek was coming from somewhere near the playground, but it wasn't the usual sound of children playing. This was terror, pure and primal. She struggled to her feet, her heart pounding as she scanned the area, trying to locate the source of the commotion. Then she saw it. About 50 yards away, near the playground area, a massive swarm of bees had descended on the park. The cloud of insects was enormous, thousands upon thousands of bees moving as one dark, pulsating mass. African honeybees, Sarah's mind registered. The killer bees she'd heard about on the news. They'd been migrating north from South America for decades, and Houston sat right in their path. These weren't the docile European honeybees kept by beekeepers. These were aggressive, defensive insects that could pursue perceived threats for miles. People were running in all directions, parents grabbing children, screaming, stumbling over picnic baskets and toys in their panic to escape. The swarm seemed to have originated from a fallen tree branch near the jogging trail, likely disturbed by someone who'd gotten too close to their hive. Now they were defending their territory with the legendary fury that had earned them their deadly reputation. And right in their path, frozen in terror, stood a young woman in a white uniform, her hands gripping the handle of an expensive-looking baby stroller. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The nanny, she could see now, was paralyzed by fear, her eyes wide and unseeing as the swarm approached, but it was the baby in the stroller that made Sarah's blood run cold. The child, no more than a year old, sat oblivious to the danger, her tiny hands reaching toward a stuffed elephant. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. The swarm was perhaps 20 feet away and closing fast. The nanny wasn't moving. Nobody else was close enough to help. In seconds, those bees would be on top of them. Sarah didn't think. She ran. Her pregnant body protested with every step, her lungs burning as she pushed herself faster than she'd moved in months. The distance between her and the stroller seemed impossibly far, but somehow her legs kept pumping, driven by an instinct deeper than self-preservation. She didn't think about the risks, didn't calculate the danger to herself or her unborn child. She simply knew that she had to reach that baby. "Move!" Sarah screamed at the nanny as she closed the distance. "Get out of the way!" The young woman finally snapped out of her terror-induced paralysis and stumbled backward, but she left the stroller behind. Sarah reached it just as the first bees arrived. She grabbed the handle and pushed with all her strength, shoving the stroller away from the approaching swarm. The baby inside let out a startled cry as the stroller rolled rapidly across the grass, but Sarah had no time to be gentle. The bees hit her like a living wall. Pain exploded across her face, her arms, her neck. Dozens of stings landed in the first few seconds, each one a burning needle of agony. Sarah threw her arms over her head and ran, trying to lead the swarm away from the baby and the other people in the park. The bees followed, their angry buzzing filling her ears, as more and more of them found their target. She could feel them in her hair, crawling on her skin, their stingers piercing her flesh again and again. Her vision blurred with tears and swelling. Her throat began to close, each breath became a struggle. But still she ran, putting distance between herself and that stroller, drawing the swarm's fury onto herself and away from everyone else. Sarah didn't remember falling. One moment she was running and the next she was on the ground, her body convulsing as the venom flooded her system. She curled into a ball, trying to protect her belly, her baby, even as consciousness began to slip away. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was the sound of sirens, distant but growing closer. Sarah woke to the rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors and fluorescent lights that seemed too bright even through her swollen eyelids. Every inch of her body screamed in protest as she tried to move. Her face felt like it had been inflated to twice its normal size. Her arms were wrapped in bandages, and there was an oxygen mask over her nose and mouth. Panic seized her before anything else, and her hand flew to her belly. A nurse appeared instantly at her bedside, her kind face coming into focus as Sarah's vision adjusted. "Easy, honey. Easy now. Your baby is fine. The doctors checked everything. Your little one's heartbeat is strong and steady." Relief flooded through Sarah so powerfully that tears spilled down her cheeks, stinging the multiple bee stings that covered her face. The nurse gently wiped them away with a soft cloth, careful to avoid the worst of the swelling. "You're a very lucky woman," the nurse continued, adjusting the IV drip connected to Sarah's arm. "You were stung 73 times. At that number, with the venom load you received, most people would have gone into full anaphylactic shock. But you and your baby, you both fought through it. The doctors gave you antihistamines and steroids that are safe for pregnancy. You're going to be sore for a while, and those stings are going to itch something terrible as they heal, but you're going to be okay." Sarah tried to speak, but her throat was too swollen, and the words came out as barely a croak. "The baby. In the stroller. Safe and sound," the nurse assured her. "Not a single sting thanks to you. You're a hero, sweetheart. Everyone's been talking about what you did." The next few hours passed in a blur of doctors checking her vitals, asking questions about allergies and medical history that Sarah answered as best she could. She didn't tell them she was homeless. She didn't mention that she had no address to put on their forms, no insurance card to hand them, no family to list as an emergency contact. She gave them the name of the free clinic where she'd been receiving prenatal care and prayed they wouldn't press her for more information. By the second day, the swelling had reduced enough that Sarah could open her eyes fully. She was moved from the intensive care unit to a regular room, a small private space that felt like luxury compared to the warehouse floors and park benches she'd been sleeping on. A social worker visited, asking gentle questions about her situation, and Sarah knew she couldn't hide the truth anymore. When she finally admitted she was homeless, she braced herself for judgment or pity, but the social worker simply nodded and made notes, promising to look into resources that might help. On the third day, Sarah had a visitor. The man who entered her room was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than Sarah had earned in the entire past year. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep. He carried a massive bouquet of flowers in one hand and what looked like a gift basket in the other. "Ms. Mitchell?" he asked, his voice deep and slightly uncertain. "I'm Marcus Chen. My daughter, Lily. She was the baby in the stroller. You saved her life." Sarah tried to sit up straighter, suddenly acutely aware of how she must look with her swollen face, hospital gown and tangled hair. "I'm glad she's okay," she managed to say, though her voice was still rough and damaged from the swelling in her throat. Marcus set the flowers and basket on the table beside her bed and pulled a chair close. His hands were shaking slightly, Sarah noticed. This confident-looking man was barely holding himself together. "Okay doesn't begin to cover it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't done what you did, African honeybees don't stop. They would have killed her. The doctors told me that a child her age, with her body weight, couldn't have survived more than 15 or 20 stings. You took 73 stings meant for my daughter. You put yourself and your baby at risk to save a child you'd never met." He stopped, his voice breaking. Sarah watched as this powerful man struggled to compose himself, one hand covering his eyes as he took several deep breaths. "I lost my wife 2 years ago," Marcus continued when he could speak again. "Car accident on I-10 during a rainstorm. Lily was only 3 months old. I've been raising her alone, trying to be both mother and father, trying to fill a hole that can never be filled. She's everything to me. She's all I have left of the woman I loved. And you saved her." A complete stranger risked everything to save her. Sarah didn't know what to say. She could see the depth of his grief and gratitude, and it made her uncomfortable. She hadn't been thinking about heroism or sacrifice when she ran toward that stroller. She'd simply reacted. Anyone would have done the same thing, she said quietly. No, Marcus shook his head firmly. No, they wouldn't have. Jessica, Lily's nanny, she froze. Everyone else was running away. You ran toward the danger. You're 8 months pregnant and living on the streets, and you still thought about someone else before yourself. That's not something anyone would do. That's something extraordinary. Sarah's eyes widened. How did you know I was homeless? I hired a private investigator, Marcus admitted. After the incident at the park, I had to find you. The paramedics took you to the hospital before I could thank you. I didn't even know your name. So I offered a reward for information, put up flyers, worked with the news stations. It took me 4 days, but I found you. And when I did, I learned about your situation. I learned that you've been on the streets for 4 months, that you're due to give birth in 3 weeks, that you have nowhere to go. Heat flushed Sarah's cheeks, a combination of embarrassment and shame. I don't need your pity, she said, her voice sharper than she intended. I'm managing. This isn't pity, Marcus said. This is a debt I can never repay. You gave me back my daughter, my reason for living. You can't put a price on that, and I'm not going to let the woman who saved my child's life give birth on the street or in an overcrowded shelter. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, placing it on the table beside her bed. I own a tech company here in Houston. We develop cybersecurity software. I'm not going to pretend I'm not wealthy, because you'll find out anyway. I have a house in River Oaks, one of those ridiculous mansions with more rooms than any 3 people need. There's an entire guest wing that nobody uses. I want you to come stay there, you and your baby, for as long as you need. Sarah stared at him, certain she'd misheard. You want me to move into your house? You don't even know me. I know you're brave. I know you're selfless. I know you value life above your own safety. That's more than I know about most people I've met in business or society circles, Marcus replied. Look, I understand this is overwhelming. I understand you have no reason to trust me, but please at least think about it. You have a baby coming. You need a safe place to rest, good food, prenatal care. Let me give you that. Let me do this one thing to begin to repay what you did for my family. Sarah wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her that accepting charity from a stranger was dangerous, that there were always strings attached, that nothing in life was ever truly free. But another part of her, the part that woke up every morning aching and exhausted, the part that worried constantly about bringing a baby into homelessness, that part was screaming at her to accept. Why? She asked finally. Why does this matter so much to you? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. After my wife died, I went to a very dark place. I built walls around myself and Lily. I hired nannies and assistants and kept everyone at arm's length. I convinced myself that if I didn't let anyone get close, I couldn't be hurt again. I turned my house into a museum instead of a home. And then you came along and reminded me what really matters. Connection, compassion, the simple human act of caring about another person's well-being. You didn't know, Lily. You didn't know who I was or what I could do for you. You just saw a child in danger and you acted. That's the kind of person I want my daughter to grow up around. That's the kind of goodness I want in our lives. Sarah felt tears welling up again, though whether from his words or the hormones or the overwhelming surrealism of the situation, she couldn't say. I don't know how to be what you think I am, she whispered. You don't have to be anything except yourself, Marcus said gently. Just say yes, come to my house when they discharge you. Meet Lily properly. Give yourself and your baby a safe place to land. If you hate it, if you feel uncomfortable, you can leave. No strings, no obligations beyond basic courtesy. But please, at least try. Sarah was discharged from the hospital 3 days later with instructions to rest, avoid stress, and follow up with an obstetrician within the week. Marcus had arranged everything, including having one of his assistants bring Sarah new clothes to replace the dress that had been cut off her in the emergency room. The outfit was simple, a soft cotton maternity dress in pale blue and comfortable sandals, but they were new, clean, and fit perfectly. A black luxury sedan waited at the hospital entrance. The driver, a professional man in his 50s named Raymond, greeted Sarah with a respectful nod, and opened the door for her. She slid into leather seats more comfortable than any bed she'd slept in for months. The drive to River Oaks took 25 minutes through Houston's sprawling landscape. Sarah watched through the window as the scenery changed, the dense urban core giving way to tree-lined streets and elegant homes that grew progressively larger and more impressive. When they finally pulled through iron gates and up a circular driveway, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Marcus's house wasn't just a mansion. It was a statement of wealth so profound that it seemed to exist in a different reality from the world Sarah knew. The modern colonial structure sprawled across what must have been at least 2 acres, with manicured lawns, flowering gardens, and a fountain in the circular driveway that probably cost more than most people's homes. Marcus met her at the door, Lily balanced on his hip. The baby had her father's dark eyes and an infectious smile that she flashed at Sarah without hesitation or fear. "Welcome," Marcus said, stepping aside to let Sarah enter. The interior was just as impressive as the exterior, all soaring ceilings, marble floors, and tasteful artwork. But Sarah noticed what Marcus had mentioned in the hospital. Despite its grandeur, the house felt empty, more like a showroom than a home. There was no clutter, no personal touches, no warmth. A woman in her 60s approached, her grey hair pulled back in a neat bun. "This is Margaret," Marcus introduced. "She manages the household. Margaret, this is Sarah Mitchell." Margaret's smile was genuine and warm. "Ms. Mitchell, it's a pleasure. Mr. Chen has told us all about you. Let me show you to your rooms." Rooms, plural. Sarah followed Margaret up a curved staircase to the 2nd floor and down a hallway to a suite that was bigger than some apartments she'd lived in before. There was a bedroom with a king-sized bed, a sitting area with a couch and television, and a bathroom with both a tub and separate shower. French doors opened onto a balcony overlooking the gardens. "Mr. Chen had some things brought in that he thought you might need," Margaret said, gesturing to the closet. Inside, Sarah found maternity clothes in various styles and sizes, all with the tags still attached. There were toiletries in the bathroom, towels so soft they felt like clouds, and a basket of prenatal vitamins and healthy snacks on the bedside table. "This is too much," Sarah said, feeling overwhelmed. "Nonsense," Margaret replied with a gentle firmness. "You're a guest in this house and guests are treated well. Now dinner is at 7, but if you need anything before then, just press the button on the phone by your bed. It rings directly to the kitchen. Rest now. You look exhausted." After Margaret left, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her mind reeling. Just 1 week ago, she'd been sleeping in an abandoned warehouse, selling water bottles to survive. Now she was in a mansion, surrounded by luxuries she could never have imagined. It felt like a dream, and Sarah was terrified of when she might wake up. If you found this story moving, consider subscribing to our channel. We share real stories of courage, redemption, and the unexpected ways lives can intersect and transform each other. What would you have done in Sarah's position? Would you have accepted Marcus's offer, or would the uncertainty have been too frightening? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and your story could inspire someone else who's facing their own difficult choices. The first week in Marcus Chen's mansion passed in a surreal haze for Sarah. She found herself waking each morning in that impossibly soft bed, momentarily disoriented before remembering where she was. Margaret brought her breakfast in bed those first few days, insisting that Sarah needed to recover her strength. The meals were nothing like the convenience store granola bars and cheap fast food Sarah had been surviving on. Fresh fruit, whole grain toast, eggs prepared exactly how she liked them, green smoothies packed with nutrients for the baby. But it was Lily who truly transformed Sarah's days from uncomfortable charity into something resembling home. The 11-month-old had taken an instant liking to Sarah, reaching for her whenever she was near, babbling happily in that incomprehensible language of babies that somehow communicated everything. Sarah found herself spending hours in the nursery, playing with Lily while Marcus worked in his home office, handling the endless demands of his company. "She's never taken to anyone this quickly," Marcus observed one afternoon, standing in the doorway of the nursery. "Not even Jessica. and she's been Lily's nanny since she was 4 months old." Sarah looked up from where she sat on the floor. Lily balanced on her lap as they looked at a board book together. "Babies can sense things," she said softly. "Maybe she knows I understand what it's like to need someone." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than Sarah had intended. Marcus's expression shifted into something thoughtful and sad. "Tell me about it," he said quietly. "Your story, if you're comfortable sharing." Sarah hesitated. She'd spent months trying not to think about how she'd ended up homeless, pushing down the memories because they hurt too much to examine. But there was something about Marcus's genuine interest, the lack of judgment in his eyes, that made her want to talk. "I was a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm downtown," she began, her fingers absently stroking Lily's soft hair. "I was good at my job. I had an apartment, a car, a normal life. Then money started disappearing from client accounts I managed. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. The firm launched an investigation, and somehow all the evidence pointed to me. I didn't do it. I swear I didn't. But I couldn't prove my innocence, and they couldn't prove my guilt, so they just let me go. Quietly. No charges, no references, just a suggestion that I not pursue work in finance again." She paused, the old anger and helplessness rising in her chest. "Without references, I couldn't get another job in my field. Without a job, I couldn't pay rent. I moved in with my mother, tried to figure out what to do next. That's when I met Daniel, the baby's father. He seemed kind, supportive. He said all the right things. 3 months later, I was pregnant, and he disappeared. Just vanished. Blocked my number, moved out of his apartment, gone." Marcus made a sound of disgust but didn't interrupt. Sarah continued, the words flowing now like water through a broken dam. "My mother got sick 2 weeks after I told her about the pregnancy. Pancreatic cancer. It moved fast, so fast. She went from diagnosis to hospice in 6 weeks. I spent every day at her bedside, watching her fade away. She died on a Tuesday morning in April, holding my hand, telling me to be strong for the baby. I used what little money she'd left me to bury her properly. After the funeral, I had $300 to my name, no job, no home, and a baby on the way. The shelters were full. The assistance programs had waiting lists. I fell through every crack in the system until I ended up on the street." Lily had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms during the story. Sarah held her closer, drawing comfort from the warm weight of the child. "Some days I thought about ending it," she whispered. "Not the baby, never the baby, but just giving up. But then I'd feel my baby move and I'd remember that I'm all this little one has. I had to keep going. I had to find a way." Marcus had moved into the room during her story, sitting down on the floor across from her. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, and you still had the strength to save my daughter. Sarah, you're the strongest person I've ever met." "I don't feel strong," Sarah admitted. "I feel like I'm barely holding it together." "That's what strength is," Marcus said. "It's not the absence of fear or pain. It's moving forward despite them." Over the following weeks, something shifted in the mansion. Sarah's presence seemed to breathe life into the cold museum-like spaces. She brought Lily's toys into the living room instead of keeping them confined to the nursery. She convinced Margaret to let her help in the kitchen, filling the house with the smell of home-cooked meals. She asked Marcus about his wife, encouraging him to talk about Caroline, to share memories instead of locking them away. Marcus began working fewer hours, coming home earlier to spend time with Lily and Sarah. They established a routine: dinner together at 7, followed by Lily's bath time, then story time before bed. Sarah noticed how Marcus's face had lost some of its perpetual tension, how he smiled more freely, how the house itself seemed warmer. It was during one of these quiet evenings, 3 weeks after Sarah had moved in, that her water broke. She was in the living room reading a book while Marcus played with Lily on the carpet. The sudden gush of fluid was unmistakable, and Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her belly. Marcus looked up instantly. "Sarah?" "It's time," she managed to say, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and fear. The baby's coming. The next few hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Marcus called his driver while Margaret helped Sarah change and gather the hospital bag that had been packed and ready for days. The drive to the hospital seemed to take forever, even though Raymond broke several speed limits getting them there. Marcus held Sarah's hand in the back seat, talking to her steadily, keeping her calm through the increasingly intense contractions. At the hospital, Sarah was admitted immediately. The nurses were efficient and kind, setting her up in a delivery room and monitoring the baby's heartbeat. Marcus stayed by her side, refusing to leave, even when the nurses suggested he might want to wait outside. "You were there for Lily when she needed you most," he said firmly. "I'm going to be here for you." Labor was long and difficult. Sarah had been through so much physical stress over the past months, and her body was exhausted before the process even began. 18 hours passed, marked by waves of pain that seemed impossible to endure. Marcus never left. He held her hand, wiped her forehead with cool cloths, encouraged her when she wanted to give up. Finally, at 4:17 in the morning, Sarah's son entered the world with a powerful cry that echoed through the delivery room. The doctor placed him on Sarah's chest, and she looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her baby, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it took her breath away. "He's beautiful," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "What's his name?" Sarah had been thinking about this for months, cycling through dozens of possibilities. But in that moment, holding her son after everything she'd been through, only one name felt right. "Hope," she said softly. "His name is Hope. Because that's what he gave me when I had nothing else." The nurses cleaned and checked Hope, pronouncing him healthy despite his mother's difficult circumstances. 8 pounds, 2 ounces, 21 inches long, 10 fingers, 10 toes. Perfect. When they were finally alone in the recovery room, Sarah cradling Hope while he slept, Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I have something to tell you," he said. "And I need you to hear me out before you respond." Sarah's heart began to pound. Here it comes, she thought. The conditions, the expectations, the price for all this generosity. "I've been alone for 2 years, Marcus began. "I built walls so high I couldn't see over them. I convinced myself that Lily and I were fine, that we didn't need anyone else. Then you came into our lives and showed me how wrong I was. You brought warmth back into that house. You made it a home again. You made me remember what it feels like to care about someone, to look forward to coming home at the end of the day." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "I'm not saying this because I think you owe me anything. You don't. I'm saying this because I've realized something over these past weeks. I'm falling for you, Sarah. Not because of what you did for Lily, though that will always be the most important thing anyone has ever done for me. I'm falling for you because of who you are. Your strength, your gentleness, the way you see the good in people, despite everything you've been through." Sarah's breath caught. "Marcus, let me finish," he said quickly. "I know this is complicated. I know you just gave birth, that you're vulnerable, that there's a power imbalance because I have money and you don't. I know all of that. I'm not asking you for anything right now. I just needed you to know how I feel. Whether you stay as a guest, as a friend, or as something more, that's entirely your choice. There's no pressure, no expectations. I needed to be honest with you." Sarah looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms, then back at Marcus. His vulnerability was written clearly on his face, this powerful man who was risking rejection to speak his truth. She thought about the past weeks, about how safe she'd felt in his home, how natural it had become to have him beside her, how Lily had brought them together in ways neither could have predicted. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I've been hurt so many times. I don't know if I can trust what I'm feeling. I don't know if this is real or if I'm just grateful, if I'm confusing appreciation with something deeper." "That's fair," Marcus nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." They might have continued the conversation, but the arrival of a nurse interrupted them, coming to check on Sarah and Hope. The moment passed, but something had been set in motion, a possibility hanging in the air between them. Sarah and Hope came home from the hospital 3 days later. Margaret had transformed one of the guest rooms into a nursery, complete with a crib, changing table, and every baby supply Sarah could possibly need. The generosity should have felt overwhelming, but instead it felt like coming home. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. Sarah recovered from childbirth while caring for Hope, learning the exhausting reality of life with a newborn. Margaret helped during the day, and Marcus took the night shifts, bringing Hope to Sarah for feedings, and then changing and soothing him so Sarah could rest. They were becoming a family, Sarah realized, though neither of them had put a label on what they were to each other. It was 6 weeks after Hope's birth when everything changed. Sarah was in the living room, Hope sleeping in a bassinet beside her while she read, when she heard the front door open. Voices echoed from the foyer, Margaret's polite greeting followed by a woman's response, sharp and imperious. "Where is Marcus? I've been calling him for days." Sarah looked up as a stunning woman swept into the living room, her designer outfit and perfect makeup speaking of wealth and privilege. She stopped short when she saw Sarah, her expression shifting from annoyance to shock to something that looked like fury. "Who are you?" the woman demanded. Before Sarah could respond, Marcus appeared from his office, his face going pale. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" Victoria's voice rose. "I've been in Paris for 8 months working on opening our European office, and I come home to find some homeless woman living in your house with a baby. What's going on, Marcus?" Sarah felt her face burn. The way Victoria said homeless woman made it sound like an accusation, a crime. "Her name is Sarah," Marcus said, his voice hard, "and she's my guest. How she came to be here is none of your concern." "None of my concern," Victoria laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "I'm your fiancé, Marcus. Everything about your life is my concern." "Ex-fiancé," Marcus corrected. "We ended our engagement before you left for Paris, Victoria. We both agreed it wasn't working." "We agreed to take a break," Victoria shot back, "to give each other space while I handled the Paris expansion. I come back ready to set a wedding date, and I find you playing house with... She turned to Sarah, looking her up and down with undisguised contempt. "I see what this is. You saw an opportunity, didn't you? A rich widower, a motherless child. You manufactured a situation to make yourself indispensable. Did you even save Lily from those bees, or was that staged too?" Sarah stood up slowly, her hands clenched at her sides. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to grab Hope and disappear before this situation exploded. But another part of her, the part that had survived months on the street, that had given birth to her son despite having nothing, that part refused to be diminished. "I don't expect you to understand my situation," Sarah said, her voice quiet but steady. "People like you never do, but I didn't ask for Marcus's help. I didn't seduce him or manipulate him. I saved his daughter's life because it was the right thing to do, and he offered me shelter because he's a good man. What happens between us is our business, not yours." "How dare you," Victoria began, but Marcus cut her off. "Enough!" His voice cracked like a whip through the room. "Victoria, you need to leave. Now." "You're choosing her over me?" Victoria's voice was incredulous. "Her? She has nothing, Marcus. She is nothing. I can give you connections, status, a partner who fits into your world. What can she possibly offer you?" Marcus looked at Sarah, and the expression on his face made her heart skip. "She offers me something you never could, Victoria. She makes me want to be a better man. She makes my house feel like a home. She looks at Lily with genuine love, not as an obligation or an accessory. She's been through hell and came out the other side with her humanity intact. That's worth more than all the status and connections in the world." He turned back to Victoria. "We're done. We've been done for a long time. I was just too tired to admit it. Now please leave my home." Victoria's face contorted with rage and hurt. She looked between Marcus and Sarah, seemed about to say something cutting, then thought better of it. "You'll regret this," she said finally. "Both of you." She swept out of the room as dramatically as she'd entered. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house. In the silence that followed, Sarah and Marcus stared at each other. Hope began to fuss in his bassinet, and Sarah automatically bent to pick him up, holding him against her shoulder. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," Marcus said quietly. "Is it true?" Sarah asked. "What you said to her?" "Every word." Marcus crossed the room until he was standing in front of her, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "I meant what I told you in the hospital, Sarah. I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I already have. And if you don't feel the same way, that's okay. But don't leave because of Victoria. Don't let her poison what we're building here." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "I'm terrified of trusting this, of believing it's real, but I think I'm falling in love with you too." Marcus reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. "Then let's be terrified together," he said. "Let's build something real, something honest. No more walls, no more hiding. Just us figuring it out one day at a time." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, mindful of the baby between them. Sarah kissed him back, tasting salt from her tears and feeling something tight and fearful in her chest finally begin to loosen. When they pulled apart, Hope was watching them with wide, curious eyes, and somewhere in the house, Sarah could hear Lily laughing at something Margaret had done. This strange, unexpected family they'd created, this home built on tragedy and chance, and the simple act of one person helping another. "One day at a time," Sarah agreed, leaning into Marcus's embrace. "I can do that." Outside, the Houston sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside the mansion that had once felt like a museum, warmth and laughter filled rooms that had been empty for too long. Sarah Mitchell, who had lost everything and survived, who had given without expecting anything in return, had found something she'd stopped believing existed. She'd found home. Thank you for taking this journey with us. Stories like Sarah's remind us that kindness creates ripples we can never fully measure, and that the darkest moments in our lives can lead to unexpected joy. If this story touched your heart, we'd be honored if you'd subscribe to our channel. We're building a community of people who believe in second chances, in the power of compassion, and in the resilience of the human spirit. We'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced an act of kindness that changed your life? Have you been the one to offer help when someone needed it most? Share your stories in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And tell us, what did this story teach you about courage, vulnerability, and the unexpected ways our lives can intersect? Did you enjoy this story? Your thoughts and reflections make this community richer for all of us.